All right, welcome to another episode of the Principal Liner Notes. I have just had just such a lovely conversation with my guest today, Erin Austin. And as often when I have guests on the podcast, I say to myself, we should be recording this because we just get right into it. So I am very grateful to have Erin with us. Not only is she a French teacher and she's national board certified and she holds degrees in French and education and an MA in curriculum and instruction and all of the things. And she's also an author of two books. One that came out in 2021, The Ultimate Guide to Selling Your Original World Language Resources, How to Open, Fill, and Grow a Successful Online Curriculum Store. And that came out from Routledge. And then just a few days ago from the recording of this podcast, a brand new book has been released also from Routledge. And that book is entitled Going Global in the World Language Classroom: Ideas, Strategies, and Resources for Teaching and Learning with the World. Erin Austin, welcome to the Principal Liner Notes podcast.
Thank you so much, Sean. Really good to be here. And I feel all fired up after spending half an hour talking about music with you. So ready
Yes.
to go.
Well, let's go there. I mean, part of our kind of kinship and connection through the PLN is music and education as well. But it is always great, as you said, at every school you've been in, you have found that person that you can talk the secret language of and the not so secret language of music. I know you're a linguist and you
Yeah.
that is your specialty. But we were speaking Beatlese, if you will.
Yes, I love it. A little bit with a Liverpudlian flair.
Yes. Oh, I love that too. So what is it about music that inspires you and keeps you going? I know that there's several intersections in your own life and your family and your profession. So what are those things in music that fuel and inspire you as a person and as an educator? And maybe they're all one and the same.
Yeah. So, I mean, this could fill a book on its own, but I think a couple things really stand out just about music in general. And as a language teacher, the thing I go to right away is music is a universal language. You do not have to understand or read music to have it affect you and to be able to move to it and to connect with other people whose oral language you don't share through music. So that's, I think, profound. I don't I don't know of anything else in the world that is that deep of a connector. Food maybe comes close, but I think music is first. Another thing is that music, at least to me, affects me to my core, absolutely to my core. And it has been that way since I can remember. My earliest memories were of music, and I think that has shaped so much of who I am today. And when I realized the power that music had, and then found other people throughout my life, educators and not, who also were affected in that same profound way by music, it's a neat way to connect to someone. And then on the educational side of that, uh, I really think, our content area, our level K-16, that's great, but it's secondary. Our students are first always,
Mhm.
and or at least they should be, I think. And you have to make connections with them before they'll learn from you. And music, I have found, is a really fantastic way to do that. And spending time like before or after class, before or after school, or even a couple minutes during class where I I take a break from speaking French and speak English, uh, it's worth its weight in gold, and making those connections through music. And when I teach AP art history, man, I put music in everywhere I can. The next unit in AP art history is actually the ancient Mediterranean. And you better believe that we start off by watching the Bangles video for Walk Like an Egyptian. And then when we get to various Venuses, Bananarama comes up.
Mm.
When I first teach, when we first get into Michelangelo, my whole lecture centers around proving definitively that Michelangelo was the first punk rocker. I also really try to prove my odd maybe theory that Scott Weiland is a reincarnation of Vincent van Gogh. And they even look like each other. So I like to put these things in, sprinkle them all over the place.
Very, very, boy, there's so many things here that, and you're right, this could be another book. This could be a whole nother podcast, because first and foremost, and I've said this many times here on Principal Liner Notes, is music is that universal divine language that does connect us. It's that entry point into connection, and very much, as a former high school English teacher, I used music quite a bit as that entry point, whether it was to help students get into Shakespeare or understand Chaucer, or whatever it may be, or creating a soundtrack for the book, or just an excuse to just bring music in because I'm a music geek. But you mentioned Michelangelo as the first punk rocker. I listeners are probably going, do tell more, Erin. And I would, could you just indulge for just a moment? I
Yeah.
would love to.
Well, Michelangelo was just really kind of into sticking it to the man. He, and the man in his case being the Catholic Church, um, he, oh, well, when he was told he had to paint the Sistine Chapel,
Right.
he was like, no,
No.
I'm a sculptor. I'm not going to do that. And kind of kept on going back and forth with the Pope at the time. And eventually it was, hey, Michelangelo, do you value your life? Well, sure, I'll paint the ceiling. So what he did, um, very, so I think a lot of listeners can picture the center of the top of the Sistine Chapel where the two fingers are together, the creation of Adam.
Right.
And when you look at that, um, the image of God is there, and in the background of him, there is a shape that is very, very, very much brain shaped,
Hmm.
very much. So there's a couple different things there. That may have been Michelangelo's way of saying, hey, I study cadavers, which the Catholic Church said was a major no-no.
Mhm.
But looking at Michelangelo's knowledge of the body, like, it was clear he
Yeah.
studied. And also putting a brain shape behind the image of God may have been Michelangelo's way of saying, this is a figment of your imagination,
Hmm.
Church.
Hmm.
When he was asked back a few years later to paint the altarpiece, he again didn't want to do that and kind of had to. And there was a cardinal that was particularly angry about it and did not want Michelangelo to have any piece in that work. So Michelangelo painted him in the lower right-hand corner, naked, with a snake wrapped around him, ultimately taking a giant chomp on the cardinal's genitals.
Wow. Well,
Yes,
that is very Sid Vicious.
a
Uh
little bit. Yeah, a little bit of, oh, I'm going to do it my way.
yeah.
And yeah.
And a few years ago, here in North Carolina, where I live, there was the traveling facsimile of the Sistine Chapel. which had all these kind of tapestries, and it was a recreation. And I'm very fascinated by that work, and going all the way back to when I first learned as a kid in fifth grade that this man painted this work on his back, and then that led me to seeing the old classic film, The Agony and the Ecstasy, and with Heston as Michelangelo and Rex Harrison as Pope Julius, and the two of them just arguing the whole film. And when Heston says, I'm a sculptor, I'm not a painter, and
Yeah.
damn you, and he's just these epic battles between the two of them. And then what we have is this revolutionary masterpiece that still stands the test of time today. And again, art, language, music, all of these are entry points to connection. So I greatly appreciate your indulgence on the Michael as
Yeah.
punk rock. So that may be a book or a keynote there in the future for you, my friend.
Sticking it to the Renaissance man.
Yes, get it to the Renaissance man. I love that. What are some other entry points that you use? Because I take it, sometimes, and I remember this as a high school teacher, that sometimes if I was teaching an elective, it may have been that the student may have been there by default. Or if I was teaching the required AP or not AP course or whatever course it was, I may have not been the teacher that the student originally wanted. So how do you, as a teacher, you may have somebody that didn't pick French or art history as their course of choice. So what else is it that you do to help kind of create that connection and ignite that same passion that you have for all the things for students? How do you do that?
Well, I think it might be different depending upon the level in which you at which you teach, but I started in middle school. So what a lot of people who are middle school teachers know is you really got to let your freak flag fly and just be proud of it. And so I learned that really early on and had a lot of fun with it. And middle schoolers respect the weirdness because they feel it to their core. And high schoolers are just really not that different. They're maybe a little more subdued than middle schoolers, but when you show that you can just be weird and goofy, it loosens them up a little bit. Then I think it's important every year at the beginning of the year, like I have my kids fill out just a little info card with different questions that I ask them and things that don't pertain to my content area at all. It just pertains to the kids. And I use what I find out in there to talk to them. And one of the questions is, tell me what you listen to. And I say straight up, before you put your pencil down, I'd think long and hard about what you write, because I'm telling you right now that I'm using this to judge you. And since they're teenagers, like they laugh. And
Hmm.
I'm like, hey, if you write down Nickelback, ooh, like that's an interesting move on day one. If you write down that you only listen to country, wow, huh, that tells me a little something. So think long and hard, then start writing.
Aaron, everybody, all of the thousands of Nickelback listeners that listen to this podcast and subscribe have just turned this off. So I've just turned off this podcast, and the letters are coming in from the Nickelback army.
Well, Canada's pride.
Yes, yes, yes.
Maybe steer more toward Neil Young or
Joni Mitchell.
Rush.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Katie Lang. There's and what we can
Yeah.
even, I'll take Brian Adams too. So,
But I
um,
would like to send Justin Bieber back over the border. They can keep him.
all of the Justin Bieber fans have just turned off this podcast, and the thousands that I had
Oh,
now. But I
well, it's fair that ripping on Justin Bieber is low-hanging fruit. So,
So tell us about the new book,
yeah.
going global in the world language classroom, and what was the inspiration for the book, and what kind of things are there for educators and principals and leaders
Mhm.
to dig into?
In I was part of the NEA Foundation's Global Learning Fellowship class of 2018.
Mhm.
And at that point, I had been teaching for 18 years, I think. No, 17 years. And I needed something to shake things up. And that fellowship absolutely did. It was in now 22 years of teaching. It was the single best professional development I've ever had. And I learned about global education as a field. So I went into it thinking, oh, yeah, I'm a world language teacher. I mean, this is what I do. Like, I can be a leader here. I know what's up. And really, really soon, uh, shut up.
Mhm.
And what I learned primarily from Dr. Fernando Reimers of the Harvard Graduate School of Ed, who is an international expert in global education, there was a statement that really rocked my world. He said, global education is not learning about the world, it's learning with and from the world.
Mm,
And that changed how I thought about teaching because as a world language teacher, we do a really good job of teaching about the world. For sure, about other countries, about other cultures. We don't do a great job as a whole of teaching and learning with the world.
mm,
And there's not a great reason for that. So I think there needs to be a lot more exposure to the rest of the world for students every age, every discipline. And if kids are, this is going to sound a little, I don't know, pie in the sky, but I truly believe that if kids are making connections with people across the world from the time they enter the K-12 system, it's a part of creating a safer world. It's a
yeah.
lot more difficult to bomb somebody you know and are friends with.
Mm. That's what I call in the principal liner notes lexicon a rewindable moment. You know how
Mm.
NPR has driveway moments. I often, I'm nowhere near NPR, but I call those rewindable moments. And what you just shared there is probably single-handedly in having done a little bit with global ed and still continuing to explore that, probably one of the best examples and best analogies and cases for global education. So I greatly appreciate that empathetic um, aura that you just kind of weave there, learning with the world, and I think of how with our mutual love for all things Beatles that
Mm.
um, uh, I often say that the Beatles. Um, yes, I love the Beatles. You love the Beatles, but
Mhm.
I also love what that love has done for me and what it has led me to. So, for example, that led me to a great appreciation for Eastern music and Ravi
Mm.
Shankar and the sitar and raga and wanting to explore, what is transcendental meditation, or who is, who is the Maharishi, and where is
Yeah.
Rishikesh, and those things. Um, so I find like bands or even language or art, kind of helps not only become an entry point into understanding and learning, but it is also, to your point, an entry point into empathy for our world. and others.
100%. Yep.
So what is it about the Beatles for you?
Mhm. Oh, oh, like no other band that came before them or after. The Beatles' output during a short amount of time, realistically, was absolutely profound. They went from a band that was playing primarily covers, because that's really what was done at the time. And Elvis Presley wasn't even writing his own music. Like, that was just the vibe of that, of the 40s, 50s, early 60s. Like, you recorded what professional writers wrote. And so the Beatles started there, but then they began to write their own music in the same style, mostly, of what they had been doing with other people's recordings, the covers. And then the extent to which they grew and expanded and experimented and were just recording machines
Yeah.
was incredibly profound.
Wow.
And I don't like, any one of them is a fantastic musician, but putting the four of them together was over the top special.
Yeah. It's a synergy and a collaboration, and as we were talking about before we hit record on this podcast, um, I don't have a favorite Beatle. I get asked that a whole lot, and I can answer different things about my favorite Beatles album, which I'm
Mhm.
very clear about. It's Let It Be, and that album and we were released on the same day in 1970.
Ah,
So, but yeah, there's just something special, as you said. Like you said, you don't have a favorite era. You're not going to get in the early
no.
Beatles thing. It's that progression that we were
Yep.
talking about. That just notion of pushing expression in different ways, and in heavy ways. Very similar to Michelangelo, very similar to Picasso, very similar to these artists that just, we're going to push and push and push and push and push and push until we can't push anymore. And when we can't push anymore, we're gonna draw back, maybe like U2, and reinvent ourselves, or the Beatles did, and reinvent ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what we can do as educators too, you
Yes.
know, continually reinvent. And it's not always going to work. And that's fine. Like, there are too many variables. You have all the little variables sitting in front of you in class,
Yeah.
but continually trying to do something different and trying to push forward and make it better all the time. And just maybe sometimes make it weird just for fun. I mean, come on, let's yellow submarine it some days.
Yeah. Oh, I like that. I like that a lot. So and a big part of this podcast is connection and kinship. That's
Mhm.
my whole move, is to, you know, be that kind of similar entry point that the Beatles were for me. I'm nowhere near the Beatles, okay, but again, like the Beatles, that was like my entry point to something like Ravi Shankar, or literature, or reading that, man, Paul was digging Dylan Thomas's Fern Hill when he wrote Penny Lane. I've got to read that. I've got to find that. Or reading something like How a Day in the Life was akin to T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland. Well, what's The Wasteland? What's that all about? Or what is this French that Paul McCartney is singing about in Michelle, right? And then trying to impress, some gal I was pursuing, and it didn't really work out. But for that educator that is listening and tuning in, and is balancing work and life, or trying to hit a pacing guide, or a unit plan, or whatever, what is kind of a good start to embracing going global? I mean, they've got your book,
Mhm.
And I'll put all that stuff in the show notes. What's a good kind of simple next step for an educator, whether they teach art or French or whatever, to to go global, so to speak, using you taking a
Yeah,
page from your title?
wonderful. So I think of a couple different things. One is basic and one's a little bit more involved. So on a basic level, get involved in the conversation. So look at what the Asia Society is putting out, World Savvy, the Harvard Graduate School of Ed, University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill has their worldview program. Um, the University of Minnesota has a lot. So just start getting into that world, social media, reading on websites, that kind of thing. I think that's an easy, like, let's just find out a little bit of info. And in my book, I do talk about a lot of different resources for teachers to engage in professional development about global ed, much of which is free, by the way.
Right.
But then the other piece of that, I think that's a little bit more in depth, is a reframe for teachers. So reframing or thinking about global ed, do you have an idea of what it is? And then understanding, okay, it's learning with and from the world, not just about it.
Mm-hmm.
And then a lot of times I've discovered that teachers, certainly world language teachers, go right to travel
Yeah.
and then go right to, well, that's too expensive. And then it's shut down.
Mm-hmm.
So I think what, not I think, I know that a big part of what we have to do is when we understand that something is good for kids, we can't ask questions on a binary. Like, can we do this? Yes or no? No, we need to say, how can we do this?
Mm-hmm.
We need to presuppose that this is going to happen. So, what's our route to get there? So, for example, for world language teachers, so many are like, it's too expensive. I can't do global travel with kids. No, that's a yes or no. You need to come into it with how. How do I make this happen for kids? Because there are ways to do it. And we need to think about creativity. So one example that I put in the book, which is absolutely possible for multiple content areas, is virtual reality. So getting a virtual reality system in your media center. And I don't know about you, but every media person I've ever met geeks out about new media.
Yeah.
Like they are excited. So if you get a virtual reality system, you can set it up in your media center. And what I do or have done is the books that we read in class, wherever they take place, and I specifically try to get books that take place all over the Francophone world. I send students up to the media center. They work with the media specialists with the VR headsets and visit these places through VR
Wow.
and being in like a 3D type of world. Now, there's a couple arguments that I hear to that. And number one is going to be, well, VR systems are so expensive. Okay, well, how are you going to get that? Maybe apply. Well, I highly recommend applying for a grant with the NEA Foundation. They love giving money to global education themed projects.
Hmm.
Go get money from them. And the grant process with them is not difficult. The second thing is I hear people saying, well, that's not really travel. Well, that I think is a statement that really is coming from a place of privilege from someone who has traveled, from someone who has never, from a student who's never left maybe their neighborhood. To have a VR experience in Bogota, Colombia might be really profound. And for someone who maybe has a physical limitation that they can't leave the country, and because they don't have access to things that they need in other countries, VR is a great option. So we need to look at the wide range of students we have and expand our view. And then there's a lot of different ways that we can make connections with classrooms across the world. And what if we were VRing in Bogota, Colombia, while we also had a connection with a classroom in Bogota?
Mm-hmm.
So it can keep on spiraling, but those are a couple things.
Those are really good starting points.
Yeah,
And again, as I just kept hearing the word empathy, uh,
absolutely.
empathetic entry points that are there. To take another turn to music, I noticed, and I'm grateful for all of your responses to the pre-podcast questions. And there was one that stood out that, again, we've lost the Justin Bieber fan base right now. We've lost the Nickelback fan base, but Radiohead, you
Oh,
you you made a very strong statement of mourning,
yes.
of candor, regarding the death of Radiohead.
The
And
death of Radiohead, the rock band.
yes, yes, the rock band. Yes, they're
Yes.
still with us, all of them.
Yes.
And we're very grateful. There's been side projects and soundtracks, and they've, yes. So let's go there now. And I'll just tell you what camp I fall into with Radiohead. Now, I remember when Creep came out,
Mhm.
and then and
Off
really
Pablo, honey. Yeah.
yes, and appreciating that song. And then and that was around the time I first started teaching. So I didn't really, I stopped following them until OK Computer came out. And that is an album that I am firmly rooted in. And I think it probably the Sergeant Pepper, if you will,
Yep.
of its time. So I know, again, there's probably Radiohead fans that are very much in the Kid A camp and going,
Yep.
"How dare you?" So, Aaron, please, I must hear more on Radiohead.
I my musical taste lies in really guitar centric rock. Um, and Radiohead's first three albums, Pablo Honey, The Bends, and OK Computer, to a slightly lesser extent, but still, were really more guitar focused, and they were a rock band at that time. The Bends is remains one of my top 10 favorite albums of all time, and I can listen to every track all the way through. And I love albums like that.
Yeah,
And after like Kid A and beyond, I was like, wow, Tom, what you doing? What kind of extracurriculars are bringing you into this new
yeah,
space of really electronic music? Uh, and I just simply mourned the loss of the rock band. Electronic music is not my favorite. John Frusciante is one of my favorite living guitar players. And when he took a break from the Chili Peppers to explore really hardcore electronic sounds, I was in mourning for quite a while.
wow, wow. That again, I it's a powerful statement, and a powerful, and it's interesting when bands take those turns and move, and sometimes we can't always go into the territory that they
Yeah.
person, right?
And I don't begrudge them the right to do that,
Yeah,
but I can still feel loss as a fan.
absolutely. No, I'm with you. I feel that way about you too.
Mm,
I really love the impressionistic period of unforgettable fire for you too. I greatly appreciate that album, and Joshua Tree I appreciate, and I have fond memories of that album. But then I love when they took, a lot of people don't like when they went, became electronic and did Octon Baby, which I think is a
I,
great album.
yeah. Zooropa. And
Yeah,
yeah,
I love that era, but then there are others that it's just an interesting thing, but again, that progression that you talk about, and then I would love for you to mention the connection of your children to some pretty majestic. Well, one kind of is kind of a
Yes.
majestic reference, if you will,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
and another is an early reference. So I'd love to hear the story of the names.
Well, my kids have been named after two people who are knighted. So
Yes, that's
that's,
right. Yeah,
yeah.
majestic. Yes.
Yes. So my son's middle name is McCartney after Paul. My husband and I saw Paul live together, and both of us were like, oh, wow, we just experienced something fully magical. And I thought about like what Paul means to me. Like he is creative beyond measure.
Mm,
He made a mark on the world. Like the world is forever changed because of him and
yeah,
his and the Beatles. Um, and he just is someone who, without wavering for decades, has said, love is the answer.
yeah.
And I thought, okay, I want to instill those things in my son. And then when my daughter was born, her her first name, she's named after a Guns N' Roses song. Because all my life, like my name's Erin, and I was always so mad. Like there are songs for Jamie and Veronica and Amanda and all Susie. Good grief. Susie's got a million songs. And there was no song for Erin
Hmm.
until I learned that Sweet Child of Mine was written about Axel's girlfriend at the time, Erin Everly, who
Right,
was the daughter of one of the Everly brothers.
right.
So my name's Erin, and I named my daughter Everly. And she's 4 years old and still gets really excited when Sweet Child of Mine comes on.
Oh, I
And
love.
then her middle name is May, and that's a reference to Brian May, Sir Brian May of Queen. She was born in the month of May, so we spell it M-A-E instead of M-A-Y because we're like, that might be weird if you have the middle name of your birth month. But the reference and the homage is to Sir Brian May,
I
astrophysicist and guitar player.
That's right, Sir Doctor Brian May.
Yes.
So I appreciate that, and I'm a May baby as well. So, and then the other thing, I mean, it does connect to the Beatles because John, well, all of the Beatles were very much influenced by the Everly Brothers, and so that kind of two-part harmony of Phil and Don, big influence on John and Paul.
That is a nice coming full circle piece with the naming of my children. Yes.
There you go. Yeah.
Yep.
That's cool. Yeah, and I think Paul. No, I know this. I know too much about the Beatles. That's the sad thing. Paul did produce one of back in '84. One of the Everly Brothers songs, kind of one of their comeback.
Oh,
So
oh, that's awesome. I didn't know that.
yeah, I think it's on the Wings of a Nightingale, I think is the name of the song. It's a lovely song.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a
Oh,
lovely, lovely tune. Um, and probably around the time, 84 or so, another seg to your first vinyl.
yeah.
So unusual, Cyndi Lauper.
Yep.
That's what's your story with that? I love that you shared that. Uh,
Yeah.
and I have great nostalgia for that album. So
Cyndi Lauper, I really have strong memories of her as a child. She just very clearly did things her own way. And uh as did Madonna, actually, for that matter.
yeah.
But Cyndi had a different look than Madonna for sure.
Yes.
And I love vinyl and I love the art of vinyl.
Mhm.
So the cover art, the back cover art, and on the back cover of the Cyndi Lauper album, She's So Unusual, my first vinyl, that wasn't Sesame Street. um, there is a Ferris wheel in the background, and
Oh,
you can see her shoes, and on the bottom of her shoes, the sole was Vincent van Gogh's Starry Night,
that's right.
which is in the MoMA in New York.
Mhm.
And I remember as a child being totally transfixed by Starry Night
Mm.
and just loving it. And then years later, when I was living in Minneapolis, St. Paul, a friend of mine who's a musician, he was in a band that opened for Cindy. And he brought us backstage afterward, brought my best friend and I backstage, and we got to meet Cindy and get a photo with her. And she is a diva in all the best ways, but
Hmm.
like standing next to her, like she just exudes like queen of the room.
I bet.
And it felt really great to meet her.
What a great memory, and thank you for sharing that. Are you familiar with Miles Davis's cover of Time After Time?
No.
Oh, check it out.
Ooh.
He one of his latter day albums, and if you get a chance, check that out. It's quite, and it was controversial at the time because here's Miles Davis taking a pop song, which let's face it, he did that in standards, and the songs that he covered were show tunes or pop songs or what have you. And so he took Time After Time and did a very beautiful version of that. It's on Spotify. Came out maybe 85, 86. I could be wrong. And then the great jazz vocalist Cassandra Wilson did a Miles Davis tribute album, and she covered did a very cool jazz version of Time After Time, inspired by Miles Davis, who was inspired by Cyndi Lauper. So
Oh,
uh,
that's awesome. I wrote it
check it
down. I will
out.
check it out.
Yes,
Yeah.
you will dig that. And the thing with art, and I love how you framed the She's So Unusual art, album cover, because there's great artistry in album covers, and usually when I do a shot with the family or the girls, I go, that's an album cover shot, or here we are going for the Pet Sounds album cover. So do you do a little bit of that in your art education, art history classes? Do you take a nosedive into album cover art?
I don't. It's an AP course, so we're a little bit bound. Like what the College Board says I have to cover
Right.
is intense.
I know.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, but that would be a good, there's so much that could be done there. We do talk in pop art, like Andy Warhol's uh the Velvet Underground have an Andy
Right.
Warhol cover. And
Yeah.
yeah, so I will bring up some intersections like that, but a little subunit, no.
Maybe that's a course. That's a course you
That
develop.
it could be all on its own. Yeah.
And it
The
it would.
intersection of music and visual art.
Yeah, I mean, with all of your passion, and for those of you that are listening to the podcast, I mean, you're not, if you're not viewing Erin right now and just her, like I just saw you, like, doing maybe a quick Google on Time After Time, and
Oh,
Miles,
writing down Miles
yeah, writing
Davis
it
is what I
down.
was doing.
So your passion is infectious, so it would be criminal. We need an album cover, and maybe the College Board will grant you grant a waiver for you to create an AP album cover art history, or history of album cover art
Well,
course. That would
well,
be the course I
Sergeant Pepper would be studied.
absolutely. And
Only there's some people I'd like to pluck out.
yeah.
Phil Spector. Like,
Well,
like,
yeah.
I mean,
He's not on that. Well, is he on that album cover? Is he on Pepper?
I think he was on it, but looking distinctly more normal than he ended up looking.
Yeah. I know obviously he did, he reproduced the Let It Be album, my favorite album. But anyway, it could be a Kid A Benz. I mean, you could do a whole lot with that.
Yes.
You could. What if, and but before we sign off, what is your push comes to shove your all-time favorite album? I know I'm putting you on the spot, and I know that is a loaded question. But
Oh,
why not? Why not? Come on.
well, that's brutal.
Yeah.
That's
I'll give you three. Three. If
okay.
you're heading to the south of France, and which you will be, and
Yeah, yeah.
you're packing the bag. What are those three albums that okay, I need that are going to help me get through the long plane ride and all of that? What are those three albums that you download or bring with you?
Mm-hmm. Okay. I'm gonna bring the Bends, Radiohead the Bends.
Okay.
I'm gonna bring Weezer's Blue Album.
Wow.
And I'm going to bring Nirvana's uh,
Mm.
Unplugged.
Yes. Okay.
Yes.
Good. I'm glad you said
Yeah.
that. I appreciate that album a whole lot. I love the Unplugged album.
Yeah.
Big time. Big time.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard because Nevermind was produced by Butch Vig, who's my favorite producer. Um, but man, just track by track, Unplugged.
Yeah.
And I
That
love anything Dave Grohl touches.
Yes,
So,
you mentioned
yeah.
that
Yeah.
as well, and definitely someone who appreciates education. He's the son of a teacher, and
Yes.
and
Yep.
and somebody that is a devoted family man, and
Mhm.
love seeing a couple of videos that he's done with his daughter who sings. So that's
Yes.
cool. Um, it is interesting too. It's funny you should mention Nirvana Unplugged. I read this yesterday, and I don't know, maybe it was on a podcast from Rolling Stone magazine, but I read the transcript, so I'm not 100% sure. But the cellist who plays on the In Utero album is not the same person that toured with them. And they interviewed the original cellist, and in this recent podcast, I'll track it down for you.
Yeah.
She dated the producer Steve Albinini, is if
Yep.
I'm not
Steve Albini.
mistaken,
Yeah.
and very I'm always fascinated with those kind of 3 degrees or 6 degrees of separation when it comes to music. So you hear like these iconic things. So for example, She's Leaving Home, the harp is a very distinctive sound, and that person has an interesting story. Or the person that plays the trumpet solo on the piccolo trumpet on Penny Lane, he
Hmm.
has an interesting story. And so I was just fascinated to read about this cellist and her story of recording the two songs on the In Utero album. And I always thought it was the same person. It's not. And they talk a little bit about that. It's really fascinating.
Yeah. Well, I love when I travel, uh, researching the music history of the places where I travel and like going to music, um, like places where historic things happened. So, uh, like before I moved to Colorado from Minneapolis, I was like, I need to go to Pachyderm Studios, which is like an hour away from Minneapolis, but it's where In Utero was recorded. It's in the middle of nowhere in a woods.
Wow.
Maybe wasn't supposed to be there. I wasn't, but we still drove up and kind of walked around the outside. And I got married in Madison, Wisconsin, and what I had to do when I was there is visit where Smart Studios was. That was Butch Vig's studio, and they recorded one or two songs for Nevermind at Smart Studios,
Hmm.
and I needed to go get that picture.
I do a similar move, if at all possible. So, a couple of years ago, or no, it was last year actually, drove down to Macon, Georgia, because I wanted to go to the Allman Brothers, the big house here in Winston-Salem. the first three little known fact, the first three albums by REM were recorded here in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Um,
Oh,
so yeah,
and
and
they're from Athens, Georgia.
that's right, that's right. And Minneapolis. Now, hold on a second, Aaron. There's only one thing that comes to mind.
Oh, I hope you say the right thing.
Paisley Park. Yes.
Yes.
Was that the right
Yes.
thing?
Yes.
Okay. Have
I
you?
wasn't sure if you were going to go Dylan or Prince.
Well, yeah. I mean, I can go Dylan too. We can go to Hibbing, but have you ever visited Paisley Park, or have you been there
Um,
since it's
Paisley, I have seen Prince live and it was transformative.
wow.
Um, and I have not been in Paisley and I really want to go now that it's a museum. But I have friends that went to Prince's like after show parties at Paisley. And yeah, that was a really big deal. When he died, I was teaching in Colorado and got the news while I was teaching. A colleague rushed into my room to tell me, and I just started sobbing.
Yeah.
And the kids were like, "What is going on?" And I was like, "Okay, you know how important the mountains are to Coloradans? It's as if one day they're not there."
Wow.
And the kids were like, "Okay, this is a big deal." And yeah, Prince, both of my kids have favorite Prince songs, and when my son asked me what Little Red Corvette is about, that was definitely a parenting moment of, "Oh, wow. Well, honey, what do you think?" And because I maybe wasn't gonna give him the actual real reason.
Yes, yes.
But yeah, Bob Dylan, originally from Minnesota, and one of my yoga students went on a date with Bob. And
Wow.
I found out after she had been my yoga student for years, and I was like, "Patty, how could you have not told me this?" And she's like, "Oh, well, he just always tried to put his hand in the popcorn when mine was in there and that kind of thing." But their moms were best friends, so they tried setting up their kids, and it didn't work.
It didn't work out, and maybe
No,
she inspired a lyric or a song and doesn't know it. You never know with him, right?
you never know.
That is so cool. When you mentioned Prince passing away, I was a high school principal at the time, and our lead secretary, one of, if not the biggest Prince fan I know. And I remember telling her we were both devastated, and some tears were shed because that I still can't believe he's gone. Just like I
Yeah,
still can't believe David Bowie's gone,
yeah,
or George Harrison. I remember when George
yeah,
Harrison, I was telling this to a
yep,
colleague the other day, that was such a devastating day, and I hope Paul doesn't go anytime soon, but I know I'm or Ringo, I
yeah.
be a
It's
mess, and I was a mess when George died. I remember waking up crying, hearing that on news radio, and all I didn't, I could barely, I don't think I taught that day. I think all I did in class, because I was a high school English teacher at the time. All I did was just talk about the Beatles, and everybody came in. I remember my colleagues and different students that I had then and in the past just came by to visit. My whole classroom just became like a wake. So that what a beautifully sad image of the mountains and Prince. So that is powerful, Aaron. Um, how can folks follow you and connect with you and pick up a copy of your new book?
well, it's super easy to connect on Twitter or, the new weird name,
X.
X. I'm on Twitter, Erin EH Austin. I'm on Instagram, Erin_EH_Austin. And I'm on LinkedIn, Erin E.H. Austin. And my new book, Going Global in the World Language Classroom: Ideas, Strategies, and Resources for Teaching and Learning with the World, is available everywhere online that you can find books. Amazon, really easy. On my publisher is Routledge, and it's usually cheaper because Routledge runs sales all the time.
Hmm.
So anyone who's interested, I'd recommend going to Routledge first. And if there's not a sale, contact me. I'll give you a discount code.
Ooh,
Yeah,
okay.
authors get discount codes frequently, so I'm happy to give those out to anyone who wants one. It's usually 20%.
Awesome. That is quite the hookup, and I'll definitely put all of those details and connections in the show notes for those of you that are tuning in to the podcast. And then, Erin, are you if I and I could be mistaken, and I'm often mistaken. So is there a conference gig you got coming up? Did I see that, or you had a conference
Yes.
gig, or you're
Well, I
speaking
speak at
someplace?
conferences usually a couple times a year. This summer, I spoke at the AATF, American Association of Teachers of French conference in Quebec. But coming up next month, at the end of October, I'm speaking at the MCTLC, Minnesota Council for the Teaching of Languages and Cultures, I'm speaking at their conference.
Oh, that's wonderful. Then and lucky folks that'll be able to witness and experience the goodness that is Erin Austin, as we've been fortunate to have on the podcast with you. So, quick favorite Beatles album.
Yeah. Uh, Rubber Soul comes to mind. I don't know why. Maybe because it was my first Beatles vinyl.
Wow. That was my first Beatles vinyl. That was, well, no, I take that back. It was Beatles Rarities, which was a compilation, but Rubber Soul was my first studio album on vinyl.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
well, I can see that. There is a global edge to that album with
I can,
Norwegian Wood and Michelle.
yeah.
So
Yep. But Let It Be. Let It Be too. Yeah.
yeah, that's a special, that's my favorite as well. So Erin Austin, thank you so much for being on the Principal Liner Notes podcast. I have really appreciated our time together, and I value our kinship in education and music and art. And I am gonna go track down a copy of She's So Unusual, because
So
that's all.
good.
Yeah, it's a good album, and I now have a deeper appreciation for the album cover art
Yeah.
that is there. As I sign off on the Principal Liner Notes podcast, don't forget to share with the world your dreams, your visions, your ideas, your art, our language. It connects all of us, just like Erin connects us in so many great and innovative and creative and empathetic ways. This is Sean Gaylord with Erin Austin. This is the Principal Liner Notes. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I look forward to catching you on the flip side.